Many, many people miss this red flag. They'll say, yeah, I know I just met them and I know they're talking trash about all these people. They're just socially awkward. So they'll write it off to this awkwardness or insecurity, immaturity, silliness, and forget that if they're talking about people you don't know like this to you, how the heck do you think they're talking about you to other people? And if they aren't yet, I promise you this, they will. Are all harsh people narcissistic? You can go ahead and drop your answer to that in the comments, but are all people who are harsh narcissistic? Now, I know I keep sharing videos about whether certain types of patterns that we observe in people may be indicative of narcissism or may lead people to believe that the other person is narcissistic. But I think it's important for us to make sure people are using the words properly, right? So let's take on this idea of harshness, that if a person is harsh, does that mean that they're narcissistic? So you can start in this video, just take a moment, pause it even if you need to. Think of the harsh people that you know. And think about them throughout this video. And at the end of this video, I want you to reflect on this question again. Harshness is a complex kind of cluster of stuff in a person. Harsh people are abrupt. They tend to be unfiltered. They tend to be direct. It's very direct communication sometimes. I mean, for lack of a better way to put it, it's communication without lubrication. Without the little things we might say to someone to make difficult words a little easier to hear, a harsh person might say, you weren't qualified, that's why you didn't get the job. A less harsh person would say, we're glad you applied, it was great to meet you, we've had way more applicants than we had positions, and you did have a little less experience than many of our candidates, but we do hope it goes well, thank you so much, okay? Harshness, well, it's certainly efficient, it cuts to the quick. It can be a calling out of uncomfortable things. It can be a calling out of anything. It can be a commenting on things where many other people might tell you a white lie, the kind of, you look great in that dress versus, don't wear that dress, you look ridiculous, it's too young for you, it's inappropriate. Harshness can feel intrusive. It may even feel like a boundary violation, as though someone is just going in on you on topics that you may not feel comfortable hearing about or talking about or wanting their feedback about. Now, harshness is tricky because understanding the motivational elements of harshness can also cast some light on it. Different kinds of really direct people in life can be harsh. Teachers, coaches, military officers, bosses, doctors or healthcare professionals, therapists, colleagues, people who judge your work. Some of them may give unfiltered feedback and it may not land well. People close to us may be harsh as well, parents, other family members, or friends. Harshness is very much a sort of interactive, interpersonal thing. Some people crumble when people are harsh with them. It can be enough to make a person never want to try something again, to quit something, to become sad or depressed or anxious. Some people actually do just fine with harshness. They just take the message, use the feedback, keep on keeping on. I don't know that anybody necessarily likes harshness. I just know that some people don't care, don't mind it, it doesn't register for them. They just view it as information. They may or may not like the information or feedback they are getting. They might be told, you can't write, you're never going to play for the pros, you don't have what it takes to be a professional singer, whatever it is. But some people don't care and they'll receive the information as information and the harshness may not affect them, right? But for people for whom that experience of harshness is painful, that experience of harshness can be brutal. It can take even a perfectly fine and warranted piece of feedback and make it really difficult to hear. There are likely to be multiple contributing factors as to why someone is able to better handle harshness. And these things can include temperament and personality, toxic relationship history or history of trauma, the stakes involved in the feedback, and some of this may be setting specific. Nobody expects a drill sergeant to be a teddy bear or a football coach to be a softie, but a harsh second grade teacher or a harsh therapist or a harsh healthcare provider, those may not be the best places for harshness when it can impact people who are uniquely vulnerable, aren't prepared for the harshness, and may be turning to that person for guidance or safety. People who grew up with harsh parents or other caregivers or family may go in one of two directions. They may either be habituated or accustomed to the harshness, and they may roll with it because it's what they know, or they may be even more rattled and triggered by it than other people because it had harmed them so much in the past. Now, sometimes harshness can in part be cultural. There are cultures in which more direct and abrupt communication is more normalized. And so, let's say if you're traveling in such a region of the world, you may be struck by the harshness. You may even experience it as rudeness. You may even find that even if you're not in that country, but you meet someone who originated from one of those cultures, that they may be more abrupt and it may feel harsh to you in terms of how they communicate about things with you. I'm going to own it. I'm just going to own my experience with harshness. I do not do well with harshness. I shut down. That's my freeze response whenever I'm around harsh people. And I know what it is about my history that contributes to it. If I meet harsh people, I'm at a point in my career I can choose. I won't work with them again, and I tend to disengage. I do fantastic with really warm and agreeable people. So I would have sucked at being a soldier or an athlete. But when I meet a warm and agreeable person, I will work around the clock to do good work with them. Like I said, I'm lucky. I'm at a stage in my career that if I meet a harsh person or have to do something with them, I won't do it again if it's possible. It was interesting. Just in the last couple of days, I talked to a very harsh receptionist. I always make it my point to start warm with folks, and she was very abrupt with me. And I adjusted, and I then kind of pulled back from my warmth. I made sure I had the facts she needed. I was very glad I had all my ducks in line because she would have not helped me if I hadn't, and she would have told me I was wrong and then ended it. I was glad when I did not need to deal with her again, right? Someone like her wouldn't have bothered some people. I have worked with some very harsh patients in the past, and I could see how their harshness and their abruptness was hurting their lives and the people around them in their lives. And I actually found it a little bit more challenging to be a clinician at those times. But once we dug in deeper with those clients, I find that harshness was related to different things. In some cases, early relational trauma, lifelong adversity, social anxiety, cultural factors. And as I got to know them, I saw the harshness as the defense it was, but it was still challenging. In the same breath, I can say I have friends who do great when they're working with harsh folks. Everyone is different. We just need to know ourselves. But the question is, does harsh mean narcissistic? And the answer is no. Some folks may argue that telling a person the hard truth and not holding back could be its own form of empathy before that person wastes more time. Maybe, but empathy may be a bit of a buzz cut in a harsh person. Harsh people may feel entitled. They say what they want, and maybe they feel they have the right to say it. But in some cases, they may say, it's what the position requires for me to just call it out, especially a dangerous or highly sensitive one where there may be no time to be warm and fuzzy. Harsh people are not necessarily seeking out validation or admiration. Harsh people may not be grandiose. Harsh people may not be arrogant. They may not even be controlling or even selfish. So really, the harshness kind of circles around the drain of marginal empathy, maybe a little bit of entitlement. That's not enough to call it narcissism. So we are back to the usual kind of statement when I make about these kinds of situations. I have to say almost all narcissistic people can be harsh, but definitely not all harsh people are narcissistic. Some folks may look back and remember a mentoring figure or teaching or coaching figure from their lives who was harsh at the time and recall it as a difficult experience, but in retrospect, reflect on that experience with gratitude because it pushed them to be better, as though the harsh mentor saw that they could handle it. It also comes down to a person's level of social anxiety. The more socially anxious you are, the more difficult harshness will be. The more difficult harshness will be for you, because social anxiety often results in self-criticism and negative interpretation of social cues. So you can see how social harshness with a socially anxious person would be like throwing an incendiary device into their anxiety. Just because we don't like someone, because we find them abrasive or impulsive or unfiltered or even a little bit mean, that doesn't make them narcissistic. It may make them unpleasant. It may make them rude. It may make it so that we don't ask them for feedback or talk with them. But like I said, but not always. Like I said earlier in the video, harshness sometimes really fits the cultures of certain situations and jobs, and not everyone's bothered by it. So be very careful when you use this powerful word, narcissism, to imply things that it is not. Because harsh is harsh. That's it. And it's a descriptive word and tells us about the person. But that harsh person may also not be selfish or controlling or manipulative. In fact, their straight talk in some cases may mean that they're not at all manipulative. They just say what they believe fits the situation, and in fact, there's no game. If they think you're not interesting, they'll tell you. Frankly, I don't think a harsh person could actually, a harsh person who's not narcissistic, I don't think they could love bomb. Because a narcissistic person might be able to keep their harshness at bay long enough to love bomb you, and then it may appear during the devaluation phase. I just think a harsh person would call it straight from the beginning, and that's not going to seem that romantic. Listen, I don't struggle with harsh people because they're narcissistic. I'm just a little bit of a sensitive gal, and I do well with warmly given feedback. And when given a choice, I'm not going to hang in the harsh end of the swimming pool. However, I've gotten to know some harsh folks pretty well. And while I found them a bit abrupt and caustic and difficult, in my experience, at least most of the harsh people I know didn't need to be admired. They didn't have grandiose fantasies, and they weren't selfish. They're just harsh. In some cases, I got to know their children, who told me, I'm very aware of how harsh my parent is. But they didn't view their parent as narcissistic. They're like, yeah, my parent was harsh. They always showed up. They did make us a priority. They never needed to be on a stage. If their parents were narcissistic, the impacts on these adult children would likely have been very different. The only way for us to really have this conversation about how narcissism affects us is by knowing what it is and knowing what it is not. And the lack of reciprocity between certain qualities can muddy the waters. Over time, like I said, almost every narcissistic person will be harsh, but many harsh people are not narcissistic. You may not like harsh people, but not everyone we dislike is toxic or narcissistic. Listen, we all like different people, and we all have different preferences for different ways of being. So what's the verdict on those harsh people you know, narcissistic or not? None of this is simple. This red flag I'm going to talk about today is tricky because we all actually do it. We do it because maybe we're insecure or we love a bit of gossip. And let's face it, most people can get viper-tongued at times. I know I'm guilty of this. And some can get downright defamatory. When we talk about identifying this idea of speaking badly about other people, that's the red flag we're going to talk about. This is typically a red flag when people do this, especially early in the game with you. So let's talk about this red flag, this idea of speaking badly about other people. These are the people who trash talk, throw people under the bus, berate, mock, insult, and otherwise speak really badly about people. This isn't just ordinary gossip type stuff. This is deep and intense and can really be quite nasty. But most importantly, it is often done in mixed company, and it can be done on the basis of very little information. I often tell people who are in the early days, for example, most classically of a dating relationship, but maybe even a friendship or a new workplace relationship, to pay attention to this one, that they are talking with this new person in their lives or considering this new person in their life, and the person is just saying bad thing after bad thing after bad thing about other people, almost never saying good things about other people, and it tends to be how they talk about most people. Overall, it can feel like a mean-spirited negativism. Many times, people will write this red flag off to social anxiety, nerves, trying to get uncomfortable, maybe, but typically not when it's this pervasive. Socially anxious people may sometimes struggle to find the right thing to say, but it's not typical for a person who is somewhat socially anxious to start throwing everyone they talk about under the bus. It's interesting because all of this criticism and bad-mouthing of other people almost always appears to originate in a place of insecurity and inadequacy. Obviously, where else, right? Because for a narcissistic person, the only path forward interpersonally is domination. If they can achieve power, domination, control, then they're comfortable. And how better to achieve domination than to push other people down so that they seem taller? Nobody is off limits in all of this negative talking about other people. And when it comes to red flags in dating relationships, the key type of relationship to look for, actually, frankly, is how they talk about ex-partners very early in a new relationship. Now, yeah, I can understand how no one really wants them to talk about their ex in glowing terms. You might wonder, them, they're so great, why are they your ex? But when they're talking about an ex in a really bleak, dark, and horrible way on the first date, pay attention, because you can envision a future when you are the ex and the next person is getting this post-mortem on you. Now, let's face it, we all know this from personal experiences. A person's ex can actually be pretty awful, but this is really a timing issue. A healthy person, even if they've had an awful ex, if the conversation goes there, may just say early in a new relationship, it's complicated, and let's just say I learned a lot about myself, and they might leave it at that. It lets you know that their former relationship wasn't an easy path without saying, ugh, my ex-wife is a gold digger, or my ex-partner was incompetent, or my ex was a loser prick, or my ex was a half-witted sperm donor. Who knows? Maybe to some degree those terrible things were true, but it's all about timing. And the narcissistic person will often quickly start throwing numerous players, not just an ex-partner, numerous players in their life under the bus. This can also happen with strangers. Like you'll be on a first date and they'll say, ugh, that bartender's like a punk. They just keeps casting shade this way. Or they may use demeaning or prejudicial terms to describe people they see when you're out with them. Or they may make fun or mock other customers or other people in a restaurant or bar or public place, wherever you are. I recognize that sometimes this trash talking is just mere immaturity. And that's consistent, of course, the fact that in many ways narcissism is really just psychological and pathological immaturity and emotional stuntedness. But then ask yourself, is that immaturity something that you want to babysit? It's still a red flag. Those of you who are the narcissism experts out there who watch this channel, and you better be, because you better be an expert if you've been watching this channel, you know darn well that this is happening because the narcissistic person's insecurity is being triggered. And so demeaning other people is the quickest path forward for them, rather than recognizing that vulnerability is actually strength and that affiliation, healthy affiliation with other people, is mentally healthy. But narcissistic people cannot turn off that need to dominate, to be right, to be above other people. It's too important to who they are. Many, many people miss this red flag. They'll say, yeah, I know I just met them and I know they're talking trash about all these people. They're just socially awkward. So they'll write it off to this awkwardness or insecurity, immaturity, silliness, and forget that if they're talking about people you don't know like this to you, how the heck do you think they're talking about you to other people? And if they aren't yet, I promise you this, they will. Listen, I love gossip as much as the next person. I'm not going to sit here like some queen of virtue. I sit with my sister for hours and we gossip about people we knew from our old hometown. However, the sharing of the silly gossipy bits is something that happens after I know friends for a while. My sister, who I've known for all 50 years of her life, my closest friends I've known for 20 plus years. In fact, interestingly though, one of my best friends ever, we've been besties for 40 years, I've actually never heard her say bad things about anyone, not even when other people are trash talking. Sometimes I can see her wince a little, and sometimes she'll say, oh, that wasn't very nice. And she doesn't have a narcissistic cell in her body. I'm very lucky in that way. But if I'm meeting someone new, and their opener is to start talking badly, really badly, of other people I don't know, red flags pop up. And I pay attention, because this rarely ends up in a good place. And like I said, I'm not talking about good-natured ribbing like, oh, you know, wow, those are some shoes they're wearing. But even then, to be careful, because to that other person, those shoes are pretty to them. And we always have to think from a place of empathy, because ultimately, what is trash talking? It's a lack of empathy for someone who may not be there. And one of the first things we should always assess in someone when we meet them is their capacity and their ability for empathy. If that looks good, then that's a good place to go. But when you start seeing red flags like this early in the game, pay attention. This is a tough one for people who are going through narcissistic relationships, because we think of that desire or drive to want to be recognized, to want to be honored, to want to be seen as maybe we're being too much. Maybe we're the ones who are narcissistic. Maybe we need supply. What's wrong with us? Shouldn't we just do this for the love of the game? So let's roll this back a little bit. Let's start with basics. Number one, human beings, like many mammal species, are wired for reward. When we're rewarded for something, we do it again. When we're rewarded for it again, we'll do it again. We like being rewarded. It's why we would get gold stars in school and a medal for winning the race and a bonus for making the most sales. We like rewards. We like being seen. We like prizes. We like knowing that something was the best. And more than anything, we certainly like when we're the one who's responsible for that. It's a very, very meaningful human being thing. And narcissistic people aren't the only ones who like it. They need it. The rest of us may like it. But for many people who say, I really hope I win this prize, but I'm such a bad person for wanting that. You're not a bad person. You're a human person. So that's number one. Number two, for people who have grown up, especially in narcissistic family systems, or even people who've been in long-term narcissistic relationships in adulthood. Interestingly, the hypocrisy of it is that if you hold up a standard of wanting to win a prize, or you're proud that you got recognized for something or were honored in some way, people around you, especially narcissistic people or the enablers, might be the first to say like, golly, well, you make it all about you. And you may have internalized a voice from childhood that when things were about you, that you were selfish, you were greedy, you were needy, that you needed to be the center of attention. And you may have heard that over and over again, to the point where being seen would have made you uncomfortable, even though it was something you would desperately covet and want. And so that mixed message, and it is a very mixed message, the narcissistic person is tromping around screaming about all their recognition. If you express that you want recognition, you're viewed as being needy and ungrateful and selfish and attention-seeking. If you do get recognition, the narcissistic person will either mock you or put you down or make fun of you or become sullen and sulky and all of that. So recognition becomes a very, very messy space. Because what happens, and sort of taking us to this third point, is then we're already in a self-blame cycle from being in a narcissistic relationship. I'm a bad person. I'm to blame. Everything that went wrong in this relationship is my fault. Maybe it's because I wanted too much recognition, right? And recognition isn't just awards and prizes. Sometimes it's just being seen for doing something like, hey, thanks for doing that. Or wow, thank you for your help. Just being seen and noticed for what you are doing in any way, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in a family, whether it's in a relationship, in a friendship, just being seen and acknowledged for what you're doing. And that is nowhere to be found in a narcissistic relationship. So that confused messaging about, well, I want this, and it's okay to want it, can really then make the desire or the drive for recognition of any kind, whether it's everyday recognition or a big honor, a really confused place. And because people in these relationships are already, like I said, engaging in so much self-blame, when it comes to a place of even going up to a partner or someone close to you who's narcissistic and saying, I just wish you would see me, I just wish you would notice me, I can all but guarantee that what you're going to be met with is how needy and demanding and selfish and wanting too much you are. So the message is constant in these relationships. You don't get recognition. And what that does to people over time is that it leaves them wondering, maybe it's abnormal for me to want this recognition. It's a bit like saying maybe it's abnormal for me to want to drink water or want to eat food. I mean, it's a very, very, very normal desire to be seen, recognized, acknowledged, honored, to win, any of those things. So when you take all of that together, that really is why this question of is it normal to want to be recognized is something that many people will sort of struggle with. And in fact, many people who've been through narcissistic relationships will say, yeah, I got this thing, like, oh, I don't want to brag or anything. And all they're doing is telling you something. Or that, yeah, I just want to let everyone know I brought this cake and I'm just going to put it over there, as though it's somehow unseemly to be noticed for doing something, to be acknowledged for doing something. I guess the real point behind this video is to let you know it is incredibly normal to want to be recognized, not excessively, not at the expense of someone else, but simply to be acknowledged, to be seen, and to be heard. What narcissistic people do quite successfully in their relationships is that they pathologize and leave the other person feeling foolish for wanting that. And by doing that, it's actually a really, really tricky trick. Because now what they're doing is saying, well, there's something wrong with you if you need recognition. So I don't need to recognize you now, because they'll just turn it into something that's a problem for you. But in the hypocrisy highway that is the narcissistic relationship, if you don't recognize every single thing that they do, there will be hell to pay. So this normal desire to be seen for small things, for big things, to be recognized, to be noticed, will always be a confused space for people going through these relationships who will feel uncomfortable acknowledging it as something that they want for fear of seeming as though they're looking for narcissistic supply. And of course, one of the great fears for anybody in a narcissistic relationship or whose life has been affected by narcissism is that I'm as bad as them, that I'm as big a problem as them, that I'm narcissistic too. And so if anything you're doing leaves you feeling like, oh, if I need recognition, does that make me as bad as them? Hell no. Wanting to be seen and acknowledged is normal. Wanting to do that excessively, not healthy. But catch yourself when you start judging yourself for having normal wants and needs, because that is one more place where your voice slowly gets stolen in these relationships. And over time, we get slowly indoctrinated to, in essence, sort of be invisible in these relationships and obviously never be seen or recognized. So when that comes up for you, instead of saying there's something wrong with me, it may very well speak to A, you're not being adequately recognized or seen in your life, and B, that all of us want that. It's part of a normal, healthy social exchange with anyone. And C, when the narcissistic person complains or puts an unflattering lens on your desire to be recognized or seen, it's just them, A, trying to make you seem small, and B, trying to lift any responsibility of ever having to be aware of what someone else in their space is doing. I hope that raises that, and I hope all of you go out there and honor your healthy need to be seen and for recognition sometime real soon. So let me say a sentence to you, and I want to know if you've ever heard it, and then we'll go from there. I'm just brutally honest. Have you ever heard that from a narcissistic person? They may even go on to say, yeah, I'm just brutally honest. I don't just blow smoke or pump you up like the other people around you. I care about you, so I tell you the truth. So that's an insult wrapped in a manipulation with a gaslight on top. But it is a frequent theme that's brought up in relationships with narcissistic people who say cruel things to you, or are unnecessarily blunt or dismissive, or say highly critical things to you. And then when you do push back, you are met with, oh, please, I'm just brutally honest, as though their cruel words are somehow a virtue. It gets interesting because while most of us may not appreciate someone being blunt, overly direct, or downright mean, we may be open to it if it was a two-way street. If it was the case that they could also handle whatever we dished out too, that we could be brutally honest with them. But that is not how it works in these relationships. Don't try this at home, kids. But if you were or have been brutally honest with them, don't go try it. I'm just saying if you've already done it, how did that work out for you? Not good is my guess. That you were met with rage, how dare you, more rage, silent treatments, passive aggression, overt aggression, or they may just pack it in and leave for a while or forever. That is what happened if you dared to be so-called brutally honest with them. They feel entitled to behave like that with you. The impulsivity of narcissism, coupled with the entitlement, coupled with the lack of empathy, coupled with the contempt they often have for those people who are unlucky enough to be closest to them, can mean that you are faced with this kind of abrupt and dismissive and downright cruel way of being spoken to. In fact, when this happens in families, it's not unusual for a narcissistic parent to speak in this cruel, mean, dismissive way to a child and then say, it's better to get this brutal honesty from me than from the world. And this can set up a style of communication where the parent goes so far to sort of tell or portray to the child that the parent is speaking to them like this, saying these terrible things to the child because they love them, because you can be honest and open in a family, because your parent is trying to protect you. So as a child, you don't have much of a choice but to go along with the parental rhetoric, especially when you are young. And then you slowly, because of this, can get indoctrinated into a world where being treated dismissively and being spoken to cruelly becomes normalized. And over time, this becomes a very heavy weight to have to carry. And then you may also run the risk, because of what your parent might have said to you, to conflate this style of being spoken to so nastily as being loved, because only people who love you would be this brutally honest, right? This is a favorite party line in narcissistic family systems. You're just being very honest with you because that's what families do, or that it's love. That's a crock of proverbial shit, and it has done so much harm. And sadly, the enablers will get into the act and may make excuses for your parents or other family members who speak in this way, saying, oh, it's nothing, we're family, they're just brutally honest. No, actually, it's not nothing. It is harmful. And as it accumulates, it takes a toll on a person's development of their sense of self and their identity. And it sets up a person to expect no different than brutal honesty and cruel words from the world. And again, the jagged hypocrisy is that if anyone in the family spoke to that brutally honest family member and showing them love by speaking the brutal truth, they would be eviscerated. The concept of brutal honesty and it being treated as a good thing, as someone who's just being open and honest and that you're the problem if you're not able to take it, is one of the biggest collective gaslights out there. that someone speaking their mind without offering support or safety or even just accounting for the other person's feelings somehow is a way that we build character, that's a lie. And we have to remember strength is not about getting good at taking chronic emotional punches or enduring chronic criticism. To get good at this kind of sets a person up for being more likely to endure this from other people. Now again, it's one thing if the brutal honesty is all around. Everyone's being brutally honest with each other. Then that may be the nature, for example, of an industry. It may just be people who give rough feedback all around. It's still not great, but it's not the soul-twisting hypocrisy of a narcissistic relationship with the added gaslight that somehow it's good for you to hear these things. When I hear the words brutal honesty, I cringe. I'm great with honesty, but there's no need for it to be brutal. However, relationships with narcissistic folks are double standard laden blood sport for them. The number of children who have been harmed by this, the partners who have been harmed by this, even employees who have been harmed by this, it doesn't build character. And when this framing that brutal honesty is good, and when it's used when someone is being unnecessarily cruel, sit up and pay attention so you are clear on what you are dealing with. And if you are in the presence of a child who is experiencing this brutal honesty, and you cannot get them out of the situation, at a minimum, use your time with the child to remind them of their goodness. It may not fully address or solve the harms caused by the cruel criticisms that they are facing, but it may plant a seed of an offset, a reminder that they are good and worthy. So yeah, brutal honesty. Honesty is great, but brutal anything, probably not. Here's the question that came up, is that people are saying, hey, I sometimes treat people badly. I actually hate this about myself. I'm aware I'm doing it. But oh my God, does this make me narcissistic? Let's take this one apart. Like I said, more than a few people sent in this question, and I've seen this pop up in different places. So maybe the question here is everyone who treats other people rudely or badly narcissistic? And the answer to that is no. So let's break this down. Narcissism is a personality style. A gentle reminder, and I will say this again and again, narcissism is not a diagnosis. It's a personality style. Other personality styles are things like agreeableness, antagonistic, openness, neurotic, introverted. All of these are styles. Narcissism is just one thing on that list. Some of these styles make for healthier relationships, for example, agreeableness, but they are just styles. The more flexible a person is, the healthier they are. So you can have flexible introverts, people who might prefer the time alone or solitude or avoiding the crowds, but can rally when it is important to others or to themselves. Personality styles are consistent, meaning that this is largely who we are. Agreeable people are agreeable. Do they sometimes have a snippy day? Absolutely yes. Neurotic people are neurotic. Do they sometimes do things that feel fearless and bold and courageous? Yes. But more days than not, our personalities dictate how we are going to be, and they make us a little bit predictable, which is not a bad thing. Introverted people are not likely to be standing in line to be the first one at the new hotspot. Agreeable people are likely to step in and help you out. Your stubborn friend is likely to grind in their heels, and you know that going in. The same is true of narcissism, but it's trickier because more days than not, they are going to do something mean, manipulative, invalidating, or gaslighty. Narcissistic people do have a lot of good days and moments. That is what's driving everyone's confusion. But when the rubber meets the road, and for some reason they feel unsafe, or angry, or disappointed, or frustrated, or stressed, or like they're not getting enough attention, they will strike. A cobra is never going to coil up in your lap and take a nap. It's just not how it works. So back to the question. I hear from folks who say, listen, sometimes I'm not a nice person. I do get snippy and nasty and ick, and I feel awful right away. They'll say that they apologize right away. They feel bad. They'll want to make it right. They try to do right away. People who feel this way, they'll wish that they didn't do it, that they didn't say it. They're angry at themselves. They feel bad that they did it. They feel bad for the other person that they did it. And they hope that the other person isn't too hurt by their sort of mean behavior. And listen, folks who do this may do it again. But at the moment they do it, the moment they feel bad and they recognize it's not okay. Here is the key. If you are a person who is sometimes, more often than you would like, not nice, you can be reactive and strike when someone says something to you. You can sometimes say things that are not nice. But you recognize almost right away that it's not nice, and you attempt to apologize, take ownership non-defensively, and are able to be accountable. That doesn't sound like narcissism. For some folks, a history of trauma can sometimes result in that kind of reactivity, a sort of quick response at times of perceived threat. Now, let's face it, that behavior in the long term is not sustainable because it does take a toll on others. After a while, the apologies are simply not enough. But that awareness of the behavior, the accountability, the attempt to address it, again, non-defensively, that doesn't track with narcissism. In general, narcissistic people do not see their behavior as a problem. They are so firmly entrenched in their rightness and may even believe that they are great people who have tons of empathy that it feels almost delusional. If they are snappy and reactive, the narcissistic person will be more likely to blame the other person. Apologies will be hollow, things like, I'm sorry you feel that way. They will never take ownership. And if you do attempt to get them to apologize, they will rage at you and gaslight you. So for those of you who say, I sometimes don't like how I am. In fact, I am not always nice and I say these not nice things. And in fact, I feel like my behavior looks like the behavior of the narcissistic person in my life sometimes. Take a step back and ask yourself about self-awareness, accountability, empathic awareness, and the willingness to take responsibility. If you see it, that's a good sign that you are not narcissistic per se. It is a wake-up call, though, to work on mindfulness, on behavioral regulation, considering therapy, especially trauma-informed therapy. All of these are useful tools. Listen, if a person's not narcissistic, these tools are not likely to work, or any change is not likely to be sustainable. When we perceive any of our patterns to be similar or analogous to those of the narcissistic people around us, it can actually be quite devastating because it's the last thing we want to be to someone else. However, if you are catching yourself in it, you genuinely feel uncomfortable or bad about your behavior and want to take ownership, don't sweat the idea that you are narcissistic. Instead, think about addressing your behavior and your mindfulness. Don't get so caught in like, oh my gosh, this is what I am, because when we think we might actually be fully narcissistic, we may even be discouraged from making a change. Really be self-reflective on your behavior. And frankly, if you are narcissistic and hearing this, listen, it's just about doing the work, about putting your head down, being mindful and aware, and not feeling contempt for the very real emotional experiences that other people are having. Thanks again.